You are a member of a community, and you're blessed with having very certain talents, right? Certain things that just make you you. You should use your education and your talent to help make things a little better for the people who are not as fortunate as yourself. Remember this, we are guardians of each other.
Welcome to the UnScripted Authentic Leadership Podcast, a podcast where we're seeking to lead change, but also seeking to understand. We're also here as a platform for leaders to come together to unite, to develop and empower other leaders in the areas of business, family, and community. I'm your host, Lafayette Lane, joined by my co-host, John LeBron. Tonight, we are joined by our special guest, Dorothea Bozicolona-Volpe. She is a marketing executive strategist, TEDx NY Speaker, Webbys Judge,
Webbys, not Wendy's, Webbys.
Webbys Judge, who specializes in developing business for international brands, Fortune 500 companies, via initiating and integrating social media and digital strategies, and enterprise social networking, strategic partnerships, and marketing technologies. Tonight, she's joined us right here on the UnScripted Authentic Leadership Podcast. Dorothea, thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm so excited. And I also have to compliment you because Lafayette, you actually pronounced my name properly. Most people really struggle with it, you know?
Yes, it was a struggle, but the Lord helped. So we thank God for that.
Thank God for that.
You specialize in marketing, on a lot of things, but specifically marketing and branding and employee branding. What made you get into that field of marketing, especially now that we see the rise of social media in the past decade and how important that is to the success of businesses and entrepreneurship? How did you get into that field? Tell us about that and how you help others with their marketing and their branding.
So that's a lot to unpack. So I'm going to start at the beginning. Yeah. I was working in law enforcement strategy, and I began in the 90s when there were no social networks. There were these things called EBBSs, or electronic bulletin boards. Today, if I had to compare it to something, I would maybe compare them to something like Reddit, right? Where people were constantly adding data and information. And what I began to observe in my role as an analyst in working with government was that people were connecting because of content. And I wrote, I guess today you'd call it a white paper. Back then, they called it a love letter to the World Wide Web. That's how old I am. I started talking about this thing called the social object. I felt that as I was observing, people were making psychological decisions based on how content was served up to them, and also how it was being articulated from a linguistic and a cultural perspective, right? So you and I, Lafayette, would have no problem going to a beautiful white Google website to kind of, search something out, right? But someone in China wouldn't feel comfortable going to that website because white in their culture means death. So I began to talk about my experiences and how somebody might connect with someone else over a subject as broad as Italy. And someone else might enter that EBBS, that conversation, and say, oh gosh, I love Italian food. Or my wife and I went on a romantic cruise around the Amalfi Coast for our anniversary. Or, my girlfriend really loves Italian fashion. Have you ever heard of Gucci, right? And all of a sudden, these little ecosystems of conversation would start coming off of that main social object, which was the broad topic of Italy. And so as I began to learn more and more about this in my role, I thought, well, gosh, if they're using content to recruit terrorists, because I worked in a company that built anti-terrorism modeling and all kinds of fun, warranting systems and what's another thing that we did? Repeat offense modules. I got to travel everywhere from the Tokyo Police Department to working with MI5, MI6, and TDGSI, which is the FBI of France. One of the things I noticed in all of this is that it was still human behavior. It was still heuristics. It was still psychology. And a lot of that was those very authentic connections, right? Between content that was connecting people, that level of interest. So I thought to myself, well, gosh, if I can do this here, maybe I could, in some way, shape, or form, leverage this experience to create a company that, you know, you're going to hate me when I say this, gets a soccer mom to download a coupon from a banner ad. Remember banner ads back in the 90s? We had to click off of them just to get to your Hotmail or your Yahoo or your AOL
Hated
account.
them.
Yeah, everybody hated them. But believe it or not, that was part of heuristic marketing. So I had a project here in Atlanta, Georgia. I was working with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Very young Dorothea. I was very green. Came to the big city of Atlanta to just have, you know, a lunch one day, and I met someone. And I think John LeBrun and his wife, Cherie, you blessed me by watching my TED Talk. It's the story of George and I. And I had a life event, because we're going to, obviously, in the show notes of this, I hope you add the TED Talk link, which I'll share with your audience and the two of you later. That life event caused me to say, wait a second. I don't know that I want to continue to get shot at and things blow up around me. And I think it might be cool for me to try something new. And it was really an epiphany that happened on my last assignment with the UN through my company I was working for in Haiti. And I wound up in 2003 just kind of dabbling, taking a couple little consulting things that were, again, heuristic or psychological. Then they called it new media. And I want you to kind of think about 2003 in your mind's eye, right? So AOL was something. Friendster had just imploded. LinkedIn was launched, right? There was only one social visual network outside of YouTube, and that was Flickr. Remember Flickr? You could upload your pictures of you and your family. Lafayette. Mm-hmm. Hey, I tell the grandparents, hey, go follow this link like Kodak Snapfish and check out. We went to the Grand Canyon, right? And I really began to not just dive into these new modalities of communication, but I began to talk about it and write about it, to the point where marketers were kind of like, well, who's this chick, right? Am I allowed to say that? Am I allowed to say chick, girl, woman, lady?
Whatever you want. You're good. It's unscripted.
Right? And one of my first clients wound up taking me out of that world and saying, hey, I really would like to hire you as a full-time consultant. And since you understand the human side of this, we'd like for you to help us work on our first ever career section of our website. Mm. And that really was the impetus for, hey, we really like you, but I can't keep paying you out of my budget. You've got to get on the MSA of this big company. Can you go out and, get an LLC, get an S Corp, what have you, name your company. And this is where, and I know I'm going to sound a little old school here, but I don't know if you believe in angels or not. I do. George passed away on March 10th, 1999. And when I applied for my business license, like your company name and your everything, all the paperwork came back stamped March 10th. And I thought, oh, if that's not him saying to me, good job, kid, keep going, right? So that was the day that, in 2004, that social espionage was born. This year, March 10th, I am 19 years old. Not old enough to drink yet, but I can certainly drive.
That's
and
awesome.
It was really the human side of things, Lafayette and John, that got me excited about new media, that got me excited about social media. Because I guess I was maybe naive, because you got to think about what it was like back then, 2003, 2004. There were all these, it was the Wild West. The World Wide Web became the internet. Tim Berners-Lee became, he became an OBE, and they gave him a sirship. This is the guy that invented the World Wide Web as part of his PhD program in Bern, Switzerland. I just found it fascinating. And I think because I was a student of it and I was very intellectually curious, I never thought that I couldn't do something. There was never entered the conversation, if that makes sense. And so I think the thing that got me excited about it was really that human connection, like, the early days of when the Facebook, now Facebook, was started. You saw Mark Zuckerberg talk a lot about, we're going to connect people through content, and we're going to create communities. And I was already doing that for a decade prior to him saying that, even more than that, actually, 15 years prior to that. And I just found it fascinating. And I thought, this could be a real career change for me. And I'm very grateful that it's here 19 years later. I'm just going to knock on wood here. That's my skateboard collection.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody freaks out that I'm a woman of my age and I still skate. I like it. It's fun. Am I allowed to drink? It's just water.
Whatever you want. You're good. That's super interesting. Thanks for that background story. So then once you got started, then you stepped into the role of employer branding.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting when you just mentioned that Google with a white space background will look simple and appealing and inviting to someone maybe from the United States, but then from China, they might look at it and go, ooh, just maybe not say it out loud, but maybe something internally makes them step away. It would almost be like if we saw something with a deep red page and we thought, oh, this is a little bit much to my subconscious.
Right.
So with that in mind, when we're talking about employer sort of branding, then I know you've done a lot of work with that. And at a time when it's never been harder that I can recall for employers to retain, attract, and grow their talent, how can this really help them step into that? Or how can better branding themselves help them with their talent search and retaining and so forth?
Yeah. So I want to start at the beginning in that
Sure.
We had these career websites, right? And when people were doing their job search at the dawn of the internet, it was, remember, monster.com and Career Builder. And then they became, people would buy them and they became part of larger, entities. And I think that what happened was the career section of a website was sort of an afterthought. Well, we know we need it, right? We know that, we need to, in some way, shape, or form, list all of these job openings and talk about, what we do. And then when they think about talking about the company, there was always sort of that press release section. And then over time, what large organizations realized is that, wow, we're competing for talent. So then there became an element of, if they were smart, internal comms, internal communications, right? Public relations and human resources. And I know this because I helped form this group at a large company. I can't say who, but we're going to go there, okay? And get them together and say, how can we tell the story of our organization so that we can compete for that top talent? So I want you to kind of think about that's happening over here, okay? That's kind of siloed and that's happening over here. You've got a committee. They're all kind of talking about that. Then you've got people in talent acquisition, a new term, by the way. They used to be called recruiters. Now you have like a talent acquisition professional, a recruiting professional, somebody who does the interviews, you wouldn't believe how HR is now stacked in these larger organizations. And what they're really looking for is, hey, it's great for this individual to tick all these boxes, but I got to go back to the hiring manager and ask him or her or them, hey, what are some of the intangibles? Like, what's your department like? Are you guys snarky and fun? Are you very playful with the employee? Are you very buttoned up? And, is it micromanaged? Would the individual be micromanaged? And what you also began to see with human resources is they go back to marketing and say, our job descriptions are really boring. They're very staid. Could you help me rewrite this? So now you've got internal comms, levels of human resources, and public relations getting together to really, if they were smart, integrate themselves and create an employer brand. I don't need to tell you what happened during 2020. Companies suffered, people got laid off, people who were very valid in their organization. And I'm not talking about just, shift workers. I'm talking about people who had worked for organizations for 8-10 years. And it was funny because John and I were talking about this as we were preparing for the show several months ago. I said, do you know what the number one thing was that people Googled, searched out January 2021, 2 years ago, this month? Not how do I find a job, but how do I start my own company? Because people started thinking, hey, that big corporation I was working for, or that company I was working for, small or large, they don't have faith in me anymore. They let me go. So because I got laid off, I'll show them, I'll start my own cupcake delivery company, or I'll start doing DoorDash. We became, we moved from that sharing economy in 2020 to that isolation economy. You also started to see the rise of more employees talking about the things that they were passionate about, the things that triggered them toward happiness or sadness, right? We started to see the rise and the awareness of mental health in the workplace. And that's another area of my practice. But the thing that I find so interesting about all of this is that now more than ever, if I had to boil it down, John, to just one thing, employees want to be seen. They want to be recognized. They want to be recognized if they are a top performer. They want to be recognized if they're part of the LGBTQAI plus community. They want to be recognized if they're part of a minority community, if they're African American or Latinx. They want to be recognized. And part of employer branding is not just, as I said, marketing or the culture, the storytelling of the business, right? Because you want to be competitive. Part of it is also setting up ERGs, employee resource groups, being able to say, hey, remember when you were in high school? I'm a boarding school brat. So high school, they had these things called cliques, right? You had maybe the jockos, sport guys and gals, cheerleaders that hung out together. You maybe had the band nerds, the drama, class. You had the people who were in choir, Lafayette, the people who loved to play, musical instruments, right? Or what have you. And they all had their own little groups, right? What employee resource groups do for organizations big and small is they create a safe place for people to look at one another and see themselves. To have a group that's just dedicated to, let's say, people from Southeast Asia, right? Who maybe are first generation American like myself. I mean, I'm part of the American experiment. My father was French, my mother Italian. They came here legally, by the way. My father was a professor at New York University and an artist. And the thing that I find so fascinating about this is that if you boil it all down, when I do these talks to human resource people, I said, what's the most optimal word in your title? And somebody will say, oh, executive vice president, I've got to that. I'm a managing director, and blah, 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 MD. Blah, blah. I said, no, it's human. You're in human resources. It's about being human. And not everybody comes to us the way we look, right? And nobody's perfect. I mean, the last perfect person that roamed this earth, they crucified. So I'm good with not being perfect. I really am. I'm okay with it.
100%.
Yeah, I think it's just very interesting. We're starting to see the tide turn in that finally human resources over the last, I'll say 5 to 6 years, is starting to get some of that marketing budget. Because you're not just competing for the top talent. Think about this, gentlemen, and your audience members. You're competing for people who are going to stick around, who are going to drink the Kool-Aid, that you can retain. The saddest part of a tech company, when I talk to people who are like, oh, we're in innovation and that kind of thing, we lost somebody that had been here for 10 years. Think about that. All that intellectual capital, that they have seen the company grow and go through cycles of business for a decade, and they lost them to a competitor for whatever reason, right? But when that happens and you don't retain people, there's this thing that's really hot now in the talent acquisition world. And I'm speaking, by the way, I should mention this, at Talent Acquisition Week in San Diego at the end of this month, actually. I fly out January 31st. I'm there the 1st and the 2nd to talk about mental health, right, in the workplace. If you think about really where it's going in a direction where not only are you seeing that employee and you are giving them recognition, but you're also finding a way to retain that employee. Wouldn't you agree, John and Lafayette, there are no two people that are alike in how they receive praise?
Sure.
Yep.
Some people love the attaboy in front of their group. Wow, that makes me feel good, makes me feel confident, okay? But an introvert, if you call them out and say, hey, so-and-so, you've done such a great job in front of people, they might blush. So the other thing is that you've got to understand how that person wants to be recognized. Some people, and I'm going to speak more to salespeople and business development people because they're great at this, they tend to be very competitive, right? They want to be recognized. They want to win that award or that trip to Hawaii with that they can take their wife and children, or their partner and the children, right? But then there are other people who maybe they don't want to be recognized in a public forum, right? And you have to know that. And I think also more than ever, companies are looking at retention programs. Like, I'll give you an example. During 2020, when we were all in lockdown, one of the organizations that I work with, I just had a suggestion. I said, look, they're at home, they're on Zoom. It's so easy to get burnout, right? A lot of people are also playing teacher and preacher and everything else because we can't go anywhere. Why not offer them some services that are addition to their insurance and their stock options and their benefits, like maybe an exercise class, maybe a yoga, right? A yoga class, or a class in meditation. Maybe this employee is an accountant and they wanted to take a course in creative writing. So we started looking into those types of benefits that were available. And believe it or not, there's tons of them, right? Finding a good one is tough. But software as a service, things like Masterclass and Coursera and others, to give employees the opportunity to upskill themselves, or maybe conquer something that they're passionate about, but have never really maybe had the money or the time to do. And now, because they're sitting in front of a Zoom, they can take that extra class in creative writing. I'm going back to the accountant again. By the way, accountants are really fun. I've got an accounting firm that's one of my clients, and they're the funnest people. You have no idea.
Yeah, we have no idea.
Yeah, right. No, but and then maybe they want to learn how to play the guitar, or maybe they want to take voice lessons. Maybe they have a passion for gospel music. You just don't know, right? So by providing them, one of the other things that was really cool is that this one platform that we utilized at this large organization had an element of cooking classes. And you could literally go on for these cooking classes and you could say, well, I want to learn how to cook keto, or I want to learn how to make Texas turkey chili or whatever. And it was fun because some of these courses that they were taking, right? Some were pre-recorded, some were live. They'd see their colleagues. From across the ocean. These global organizations that, hey, I may live in Atlanta, Georgia and work for this big company, but you're in, Paris, France, and we're learning how to make Texas turkey chili together,
That's really cool.
To me, it's fascinating. And I think it also leads itself into a level of community building. Because think about this. Think about how many hours we all spend at work. That's a community for us, right?
Yeah. So one of the last corporate places I worked, our community was doing servitude. So we started like serving within a charity event or charity once a month. We would go do it together. And what we found was it added a sense of humanity to everybody, because there's always people within your sort of work group that you like more than others, you relate to more than others. Some people work harder than others. Therefore, if you're the hard worker, you think that, Bobby over there is kind of slacking a little bit sometimes. It irritates you a little bit. You don't try to say too much, but let's be honest, we all feel that way sometimes. And when you would go to these humanity events, you're like, wow, he really digs this. It just adds a sense of humanization to where you just appreciate someone at a different level. So while you may not always see eye to eye at work, it does add a sort of a bond beyond that. And it really helped our, I would say, department gel and keep people longer beyond just dollars. Because we were in a department that was slightly underfunded, paid a little less, worked harder than others, but we were younger, therefore the average salary was lower. So you had to come up with other ways to keep people around. But Lafayette, I think, did you have a question?
No, go ahead, bro. You're fine.
So can I ask you a question? Why did you leave that company?
Because my dad started a business and I wanted to, it was nothing to do with the company. I mean, obviously I would like to have been paid more, that kind of deal, but I loved the people I worked with. And so that was the hardest part. And my dad had started a cybersecurity business. And I knew at that time that working with him would give me it wasn't even about the experience. It wasn't about the money or the company. I wanted that next 5 years of working right with my father on building something. And whether it succeeded or failed, it succeeded. But regardless of what happened, I knew I would never have that kind of time or opportunity again. And I guess I wasn't really too worried about climbing a corporate ladder. I just wanted to have that experience that I would never get back.
Can I tell you what I'm hearing? I'm
What's
hearing
that?
that you left because of a lack of appreciation, and that you also had a passion to do something where you were building something that was meaningful to you.
Yeah.
That's what
I mean,
I'm
I
hearing.
had recently been promoted, but
Yeah.
it was funny because I remember getting promoted and I would get a raise every year. They probably give you a raise about, I don't know, $1,800 or something like that, which is fine. It's kind of I was appreciated, but whatever. And they were like, good job putting you in front of this department. This is going to be you. And then they wrote on a piece of paper the raise with it. It was at the same time as the typical raises. And it was like $2,000. I was like, I had to hold back the laugh. Like, so I'm going to about to work my guts out for the next 5 years and you're not paying me anymore. Like,
Yeah.
it's appreciated. I wanted the challenge, but we all know that you bring value when you do as your value goes up, so should your compensation. And let's not act like anybody's a saint and they're going to do this work for free. And so like, everybody's like, I would work without the money. No, you wouldn't. It's okay. And that's fine. You got to provide for your family. I'm going to be away from my family more. Therefore, I expect to be able to provide them more financially. And it wasn't the case. That was definitely, it definitely helped with the decision.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Dorothea, we always wrap up our last segment with our guests. We call it the off-script moment, where we ask our guests to give us whatever's on their heart that you feel like would be pertinent to the audience, that you want to leave that last impression. Give us your off-script moment.
It's interesting that you're mentioning this, and I'll tell you why. So today I had to write a speech, kind of in conjunction with this, and I was talking to John about this. I talk a lot at business associations. I also talk at, universities. And Emory University, and I'm very humbled, they've been very kind, have offered to have me come and speak on January 26th. So there's another shout out for Emory and another speaking engagement. And I'd remembered some advice that I'd gotten. Sometimes we don't always take in what we hear from our elders. Wouldn't you agree? Because at that moment we're thinking, oh God, I'm going to get some sort of speech and, some advice that's going to be just for like old people but I'm going to sit and listen because this is my elder and I know I need to. But it really fit quite nicely into this talk that I'm giving on personal branding to the Emory Executive MBA group. And I think there's also going to be some undergrads and some BBA students there as well. And I began to think back on, some of the advice we get when we're young, and it doesn't always resonate. I mean, Lafayette, John, wouldn't you agree that we've all gotten advice sometimes and it doesn't really land on our head and our heart at that moment, but then you begin to think about it later on in life and you go, wow, that was pretty poignant that I learned that then, right? Does that make sense?
Pretty much everything my parents taught me up to 18.
Amen.
That's great.
Amen. I think one of the things that really makes this country great is diversity, right? Is our diversity. And my nonna used to say this all the time, and I'm going to say it in English and not in Italian because I know you guys don't speak Italian. So
Yes, please.
okay, for you, Lafayette, the world. She used to say, remember this: you are a member of a community, and you're blessed with having very certain talents, right? Certain things that just make you you. You should use your education and your talent to help make things a little better for the people who are not as fortunate as yourself. Remember this: we are guardians of each other. And I used to think, what does she mean by that? But now as an adult, right? When you think about, I'm giving this talk on personal branding and there'll be executives that are, maybe later in life getting their MBA, there'll be young students there. I think if anything came out of COVID and the coronavirus, and John knows that I lost 12 family members to the disease in 2020, is that we need to start caring about one another. We need to start being guardians of one another. We need to start realizing that even though I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and Lafayette someplace else, and John, you're in Ohio, we all have a connection. We're all part of a community. And on that note, I want to thank you, Lafayette and John, for inviting me into your community. This has been lovely.
Absolutely.
In the words of Chick-fil-A, our pleasure. Dorothea, it's been a great conversation, and we want our audience to stay connected with you. They can follow you there on Instagram at Social Espionage. I believe that's your Twitter handle as well, correct?
It is, and I encourage people to, if they listen to this, to please link into me. I love connecting with people on LinkedIn, and I'm always, available, as John knows, to answer a question, no matter how great or how small.
Absolutely. And stay connected with us here on UnScripted. You can follow us on all social media platforms at UnScripted Leadership. Check out our website, unscripted-leadership.com. Our podcast is available on all streaming platforms. We've got some new things coming that we're excited about, so stay tuned about those things. And again, we thank you, Dorothea, for having this amazing conversation with us on here tonight. As always, we pray that you be the leader that God has called you to be. We're here to build bridges and not walls. Bridges connect and walls divide. Until next time, God bless you.